Just no water.
Yeah, I decided I need to put my drink all on myself before it is. Here we are. I think I would be nervous after all this time. Here I am, all nervous. Good evening, Sobriett Recovery. I'm a grateful, faithful believer in Jesus Christ. I'm in recovery from drug addiction, toxic relationships, and negativity. I still struggle with hepatitis, and I'll explain that later. Codependency issues, trust, and anxiety. And my name is Judy.
Hi, Judy.
I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, to a military family. Both of my parents were believers. My dad was church with the firstborn, and my mom was Catholic. My childhood was very strict. We weren't really allowed to express our emotions. My parents kept a what happens in the family isn't shared with others mentality. My dad treated us like his troops at work. My brother and I fought a lot, and I felt like I was the one who got in trouble more than my brother. When I asked why, I was told it was because I was the eldest. I excelled in school, even with carrying a last name like Fish, and getting picked on a lot, like FISH and learning dirty. I was socially awkward and had a hard time making friends. Being a military brat, it made it even more difficult because we moved quite a bit, never really having any roots anywhere. So my issues with trust began when I was 12 years old. I was sexually assaulted by someone I knew from school. And when I told my parents about it, instead of concern and compassion, I was met with name calling, and then you must have done something to ask for it.
Love you.
I got this, yeah. So this horrible act that had been done to me at 12 years old was my fault. My parents who I trusted told me this, so it had to be true, right? I felt guilt and shame for something that wasn't even my fault. So when it happened again at 13, I didn't tell my parents that it had happened. I felt like crying out to someone that it had happened again, but the voice in the back of my mind said, why bother? They didn't believe you the first time, so why would they now? It must be your fault. So I locked up my thoughts and feelings and let them eat away at me, building resentments towards my parents and never letting them know. I began feeling like I had something to prove. I excelled in school and was told that I could do better. I felt I was always held to a higher standard than I could ever possibly attain. As I got older and wanted to explore who I was as a teenager, I was told that I couldn't do that. They wanted to control me and did because I wanted to please them. All these expectations and rules and control on top of the trauma I already experienced led me to try to take my life at 13. When my dad retired from the Air Force, he moved to Cortez, Colorado, my dad's hometown. I didn't understand why I didn't feel like I was part of the family until later on in life. I felt outcasted. We were actually the first Asian American family to move to Cortez. When I continued high school in Cortez, I immersed myself in anything music related, anything that kept me away from home longer. I didn't feel like my home was home. As soon as I turned 16, I got a job so I could stay away from home that much longer. I walked to and from school since my dad would not allow me to get my license. It didn't matter to me that I had to walk as long as I was away from home. My dad chaperoned my junior prom to ensure that no funny business would happen to his daughter, and that was the only way he would let me allow me to attend. So at 17, an opportunity came about for me to run away a month before I was supposed to graduate, and I didn't care. I wanted to prove to my parents that I could take care of myself. They had raised me right. So I took off to Fort Collins with a stranger to a life I thought I wanted. We were homeless, living out of his little pickup truck until he found a hostel that had a vacant room. I didn't know at the time that he had moved up there to be with another girl. He would leave me in the room for hours on end and claim when he came back that he was working. After about a month, someone came and took me to a juvenile facility. I managed to escape that facility and walk back to the town where I talked to someone who I played card games with and explained my situation. From there, I ended up moving from place to place, not wanting to be a burden and not sure what I wanted to do next. I ended up staying with a group of guys who were all going to college for computer science and all had the same interests as me. I thought I would be okay there. They only had a few rules I needed to follow. One was that I needed to finish school, and I was welcome to stay there until I did that. I enrolled at the high school, finished my senior year, and graduated. I was excited. I had been told that the only thing I was going to end up doing was get pregnant. And I did. I had my first son at the age of 19. When I got pregnant, I called my parents and feared the worst, and it was the opposite. They were excited, and I didn't understand. When my son was about a year old, his dad and I started arguing a lot. He would get to the point where he would say he was going to kill himself if I left, and I would stay. This happened several more times to the point where I decided I'd had enough and went back to Cortez with my parents. After coming home, I realized I wasn't ready to be a mom. My mom stepped in and took care of my son, and I started partying and staying out until all hours. During that time, I would meet my first husband and be introduced to meth. I had gotten curious about drug use and wondered what about it had them so hooked. After a while, they gave in and let me try my first bowl. This became my coping mechanism for every stress I was feeling. I didn't feel socially awkward. I didn't feel anything. I got pregnant with my second son and somehow was able to stop doing drugs at least until after he was born. My parents told me that I had to get married because they didn't want me to have another child out of wedlock. Great reason to get married, right? I was tired of living from check to check and scrambling to figure out how to make ends meet, watching my husband spend his paycheck on drugs. Something snapped in me. I wanted more for my kids. I asked my dad about the military and if that was something I could do with the kids. During one of our smoking circles, I brought up the crazy idea to just drag down to a recruiter's office and see which one of us, me or my husband, could get into any branch of service. So we both took the ASVAB and were interviewed by the recruiter. I was eligible to get into any branch, and my husband was disqualified due to legal reasons. So I joined the Air Force. I was unaware of the jealousy and resentment my husband had for me for being allowed into the service until I was already halfway through basic training. My mom informed me during one of my phone calls that the money I had been sending home to support my boys wasn't being given to her, and that he had been lying to her about not receiving the checks I had been sending home. On our next call home, I found out that she had caught him in bed with another man's wife. She told him he needed to get gone from the property, not come back, and to leave the boys with her. My mom asked me if I needed her to file paperwork for legal separation on my behalf, and I let her know to go ahead and do it. After I finished basic training, I continued tech school, and during tech school, I found myself lost in alcohol to dull my pain in my mind. In my mind, I thought, it's legal, so why not? From there, I found myself in sexual encounter after sexual encounter, feeling that I had every right to do it. He did it to me first. Until one weekend, I had drank too much. I found myself in a hotel room, not remembering what had occurred the night before. Someone had slipped the date rape drug into my drink. I felt dirty, violated, and alone. No amount of showering could wash it off. I convinced myself I'd asked for it after all I had said it out that night to get so drunk I would remember. Success. I isolated myself in my room for the rest of the weekend, afraid that someone would see right through me, and I immersed myself in the classes and graduated. I got divorced in 2002 and jumped into my career in the military. In November 2003, I gave birth to my daughter, and my kids' school in the Air Force became the center of my world, until my mom passed away from cancer. I had worked on my relationship with my parents, and I had gotten really close to her. I had forgiven her for what had happened in my childhood, but her passing destroyed me. When I went home on leave to help with the funeral arrangements, I found my way back to drugs to cope with the loss. I didn't know how else to cope. When I went back to Curtin Air Force Base, I couldn't function the way I had before. I was medically discharged from the Air Force in September 2005. My second attempt at suicide occurred after my discharge. I was on a medication that caused me to have suicidal thoughts, and at one point I tried to act on those thoughts. Throughout the course of the next several years, I would call myself a functioning drug user, a functional dysfunctional. It would be my way to socialize, to keep people around, and to keep me numb. I found myself unable to say no to anyone who needed help because I didn't want them to not like me. I said I would explain what hepatitis is, and here's where it started. Hepatitis, with a P, not hepatitis, just saying, is the inability to say no for fear of rejection, abandonment, or reprisal. I didn't want to be alone and would do anything to keep someone around. I moved back to Cortez in 2010. I had my first encounter with law enforcement and my first visit to jail from there. I would continue to spiral out of control. My dad passed in 2011 from cancer, and days prior to that, I had forgiven him for his past issues as well. Now both my parents were gone. I fell deeper into my addiction. My boys were taken from me because I couldn't stay clean. I found myself in jail for failure to comply, and I thought it was a vacation from my reality. The judge decided that I needed to go to rehab and send me to the VA in Albuquerque for 6 months. There was a court case occurring regarding my kids that I missed. I was lucky my family stepped in and took them, but my parental rights to them were gone. The final court date was set for when I came back to Cortez, and I immediately swan dived right back into use. My reason for wanting to get clean had been taken, and they had given me a clear path on how to get them back, and I felt hopeless. For the next year or so, I would find myself motel hopping, hanging out with friends, and couch surfing, all the while using every day. My motivation to want or do anything different was gone. I would go through several relationships, a few were abusive, and all were with other addicts because I didn't want to be alone. My aunt gave me another opportunity to live on the farm on one of the rental properties, and I took it. Finally, I had a place that was mine again. I got into a relationship with another addict for 8 years who would be abusive emotionally, spiritually, and physically. If I had had any self-esteem left, he had taken it from me. At the end of that relationship, I didn't recognize who I was anymore. My hepatitis came back fiercely. I drowned my sorrows deep in the well of addiction, the only thing I thought could keep me sane. I surrounded myself with like-minded people and lived in negativity and hopelessness. I felt I had every right to be that way. All the while, what I thought it was a cricket on my shoulder, y'all would know him as Jiminy Cricket, whom I now know to be Jesus Christ, who was whispering in my ear, "You were better than this."
Amen. Come on.
Luke 6:31 says, "Do to others as you would have them do to you." But I had known to be the golden rule and strive to live for most of my life, and yet I used it selfishly. I used it to fuel my pity party. It came with expectations, and when they weren't fulfilled, it fueled resentment, sent fed back into my addiction. In 2019, I found myself in trouble with the law again and in drug court, but instead of trying, I didn't care. When COVID-19 hit, it was an excuse to get back into my addiction with no repercussions. I did everything else that was asked of me except for stay clean and sober. If I lost my addiction, I lost my friends, my social circle, and I would be alone again. When the testing started up again, I found myself in another rehab, in Alamosa for 90 days. It seemed with structure I could handle being sober. I thought I was strong enough at the end of that rehab. I thought all I needed was a support system and I would be okay. But the problem with that is, if you don't reach out, how does anyone know you're struggling? And of course, I fell right back into my addiction again and again. In 2020, I was sent to another rehab in Pueblo, Colorado. The judge had caught on to what I was unwilling to see. I was sent to the Crossroads program, and while in the Crossroads program, we got visits from Naomi from Sierra, a woman who I now call sister and a member of my forever family. Before I continue, during my addiction and throughout all the trials I've had in my life, I battled inner demons and was up and down with my belief in God. I was settled in the fact that I was angry with God. I couldn't say God or Jesus without venom and hostility in my voice. I gave him the title, the powers that be. I couldn't bring myself to say that I believed in him at all. Naomi visited us weekly, and I got to see a brief version of Sierra. Still stuck in my stubbornness, I couldn't see the message she was trying to give. I knew the serenity prayer from the VA rehab, but beyond that, my mindset was still closed off to the possibility of allowing God to have a place in my life. I still wanted to have control of my out-of-control life. On Thursday nights, Praise Assembly had CR. I decided to give it a try. When I first walked into Praise, I felt something I couldn't explain at the time. I had always shied away from churches, part of me feeling unworthy of even being there. I joked for a long time that I would catch on fire if I ever walked into a church again. At the meeting, I kept to myself, only talking to people who went with me from Crossroads. I accept all the chips that got me to 60 days, but in all honesty, it didn't feel right. As everyone else in the room was able to say they were grateful believers in Jesus, I could not. At this point, I started seeing someone who would end up pulling me down, not because of use, but his own attitude. When I completed the rehab program, I went back home, and I thought I had control of my addiction. All it took for me to fall back down that rabbit hole again was the wrong person to come to my house with something familiar. After a few more months of failed UAs and hearing about people dying from fentanyl, lace meth, I finally hit my rock bottom. I didn't know how to break free of it. I went to drug court, and the judge said something to me that hit me hard. He gave me two options: go to prison or move away from home. Which one did I choose? I couldn't live there and be free of drugs. I had too many ties to it. So I called Pastor Rob and I told him I needed help. I needed something different. I was overusing, but I didn't know how to break free, and he told me to come back to Pueblo. On August 15th, 2021, was the day I broke the chains of my addiction and started down my path to recovery.
Yeah!
When we came back to Pueblo, the first thing I thought was Praise calling me back. I still wasn't ready to acknowledge God. I knew I had to do something different from what I had been. I still didn't know what my purpose was. My kids were grown and I didn't really have any friends that didn't use. My family wasn't really talking to me. They didn't believe that I was free of my addiction. They were happy that I had gotten out of Cortez to try to get better, but I had not given them a reason to believe I was on drugs. I got my probation set up and my UAs. I was still in a spot where I wasn't happy. The guy I was staying with was toxic, so I didn't feel any better about myself or what I was doing. I went to CR that Thursday and I felt something that still can't describe. I didn't feel judged. In fact, it was the opposite. Pastor Rob and Naomi not only greeted me, but embraced this broken girl who was lost and afraid. I didn't know how to react. I didn't feel worthy of any good. I had gone back to Cortez confident and came back broken. And even though I didn't really talk to anyone, I didn't feel completely alone. God had opened up doors for me, even though it would take me a while to truly see it. A couple of ladies there convinced me to come to church on Sunday. I was apprehensive about it, still unsure about God, and yet I knew I had to do something different. I lost my place. Okay. So that Sunday, I went to church for the first time. One of the things I thought I would never do. I walked into church with the weight on my shoulders and unsure as how to feel, and someone asked me what was wrong. I had spent most of my life feeling invisible, unseen, unheard, and unloved. And this person saw me in the crowd and let me know that I was not alone. She told me that God sees me and that I was loved and adored. I don't remember what the sermon was that Sunday. I only recall that it felt like it was directed at me. Anyone else feel like that? Yeah. Everything he was saying was how I was feeling. This stranger, how could he possibly know? After service, I sought out Pastor Rob and I asked him if I could be saved. I wanted to know God. I didn't want to be angry anymore. I'm not going to say that it clicked that day, because it didn't. My stubbornness still had some power. And the relationship I was in was toxic. The the next several months were challenging, but I was still struggling emotionally, I was staying sober. I kept going to CR in church. I started doing my EPS hours at the church to comply with probation, and while there, someone noticed me singing loudly while cleaning the bathrooms and the windows at church. The song Let It Go from Frozen, just saying. God had given me this voice, and I never really knew why. I thought it was a worthless gift. It was the only thing I found that gave me joy. There was an amazing path God was leading me down, and I did not even know it yet. Jesus was working on my heart. I would listen intently at Sarah and speak what was on my heart in a small group, and after a few more months, I was able to say Jesus without feeling the same venom I had in the beginning. In January of 2022, I would start to break the chains of the toxic relationship I was in. I would finally give up the power struggle with God, admit that I was in fact powerless, and stop floating down that river of denial, because it ain't just a river in Egypt. I moved into an Oxford house with some help from someone I knew at CR, and then completely broke ties with that man that I was with. That Sunday, I went to church and I felt the urge to go to the altar. And worthy of it all will be the song that will stay with me forever. As I dropped to my knees that day, I asked God for forgiveness for all that had happened in my life, that I wanted and needed something more. I felt a hand on me, and then another, and I was broken. All the walls I had up for so long were down, and I sang the song as I wept. And when asked if there was someone who wanted to know Jesus, I raised my hand with a hunger this time. And as I said the prayer, I felt all the weight I'd carried for so long lifted off of me, and then I felt his presence like he was saying, finally, welcome home. I walked out of church that day feeling less alone and strengthened in my resolve. I signed up for the next step study, and at the next meeting, I was excited to say my name is Judy, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I knew I had some work ahead of me, and I knew that Jesus would be there with me through it all. I was never truly alone. I didn't feel I had a purpose yet. I kept hearing someone saying, pray about it, and wait for a response. Okay. I didn't know what that meant. I had heard so many pray so eloquently, and I didn't want to mess that up. And yet God knows our hearts, even when we don't. Yeah, even when we don't voice it. I was baptized on February 12th, and I felt like a new person. I can't describe the feeling I felt and how the Spirit filled me as I went into the water and came up a new person. And shortly after that, I was asked if I would like to be a part of the CR worship team. I knew nothing of worship, and yet God whispered in my ear to say yes. So I did. As I started doing worship on Thursday nights, I noticed the music that I listened to shifted to Christian music. I wanted to add songs to the jukebox that lived in my brain. The more I worshiped, the more Spirit-filled I became. Here's where this gift I had been singing is meant to be. Thank you, God, for this gift. It also helped me find a better place for my hepatitis. All these blessings because I accepted Jesus into my life freely and without reservation. Another blessing came in the form of an amazing man and his little boy. He took me as I was, flaws and all, and he loved me. He accepted all of me, and he even came to CR in church, after a lot of pushing. He wanted to walk with me as I learned to walk with God, free of addiction and negativity. He was baptized on Mother's Day, and our son was dedicated shortly after that. All glory to God for all he has given to me. As I went through the step study, I found a sisterhood, a forever family, a love I truly never known. As I have progressed, I have lost the venom I used to feel, and I'm now singing his praises. I stepped into leadership beyond the worship team and beyond CR. I made amends with my daughter for not being a part of her life and started working on healing that relationship with her. And although it hasn't been easy, I haven't given up, which is something I would have done in the past. I made amends with my family, and they are so happy I found God, a forever family, an amazing husband, and a little one who calls me mommy. I've also found my voice. I've learned it's okay to reach out, it's okay to struggle, and it's okay to say no. I am grateful for God's mercy in taking someone as lost and as broken as I thought I was and making me a servant for his kingdom. I have a hunger for his word that is indescribable. I immerse myself in it daily. I use my hepatitis to help others who are struggling. My experiences in life have become the tools I use to help others who are in the place I once was. I struggle with anxiety and several other issues, but I am a work in progress, and God has me in all things. In January 2023, I found out that my aunt had passed away suddenly and that they wanted to hold a memorial for her. I had a feeling that I needed to be there for her memorial. My mom and her had been close, and I was plagued with fear about going back to Cortez. I didn't want to relapse. God had granted me so many blessings, and I didn't want to mess it up. So I reached out to the people in my forever family and voiced my fears and my apprehensions about going home, and yet I felt like I was being pulled home. So I was told to pray about it. I found myself with two questions. Are you going there to support your family? And do you have any desire to go back to that life knowing what you have in public? Oddly enough, God had already put plans into motion for me. On that Sunday, I was heading up to Cortez. I was given the honor I was speaking to our lead pastor about my walk and how I'd come to praise. And when I left on that trip, I was spirit-filled, like overflowing, singing his praises, windows down, all that. I believe God was cheering me on as I took the next step in achieving freedom from my addiction. What I wasn't aware of was that there was another place I was supposed to be while in Cortez. I had planned on coming back on Wednesday that week, and the path that I needed to come home was closed. And stayed closed until that Saturday. There's a CR that happens there on Friday. I went to that CR and saw someone I used with and had gone through some things with in the past. She was on the worship team for their CR, and we both were so amazed by this. We were both in tears. And when I told her what I was doing in Pueblo, she said it was what she had needed to hear because she had been struggling. God is so good. I knew God had truly broken the chains of my addiction. So now I am officially 3 years next Thursday, free from drug addiction. 2.5 years free from toxic relationships. Currently, I'm going to school to gain my degree in music with an emphasis in worship. I pray that this testimony will help someone who feels invisible or feels alone in their struggle to know that they're not alone and they are loved by God. To the newcomer, I say this program took me from a place of darkness and hopelessness and brought me into the light. It really does work if you work it, both it and you are with it.
Yay! Yay!
In my class, I'm going to end it worship. Why you never showed me? It's always been a mystery. All my life I've been told I belong at the end of the line. With all the other comforts, with all the negative lights. But it turns out they're the ones you were looking for all this time. Cause I'm just a nobody, trying to tell everybody all about somebody who saved my soul. And ever since you rescued me, you gave my heart a song to sing. I'm waiting for the world to see nobody but Jesus. I'm waiting for the world to see nobody but Jesus. Now Moses had to stay until he brought a rock to the sword fight. He gave 12 outsiders, nobody would have chosen, and he changed the moral of the story is everybody's got a purpose. So when I hear that they start talking to me, saying who do you think are, I say I'm just a nobody, trying to tell everybody all about somebody who saved my soul. Ever since you rescued me, you gave my heart a song to sing. I'm waiting for the world to see nobody but Jesus. I'm waiting for the world to see nobody but Jesus. We're gonna go down, down, down in history as another blood-bought, faithful member of the family. And if they all forget my name, well, that's fine with me. I'm living for the world to see nobody but Jesus. Let it go down, down, down in history as another blood-bought, faithful member of the family. And if they all forget my name, well, that's fine with me. I'm waiting for the world to see nobody but Jesus. Cause I'm just a nobody, trying to tell everybody all about somebody who saved my soul. And ever since you rescued me, you gave my heart a song to sing. I'm waiting for the world to see nobody but Jesus. For the world to see nobody but Jesus. I'm waiting for the world to see nobody but Jesus.